In the distant threads of the Karat Nebula, a swirl of indigo gas wrapped around the planet Valari like a lover reluctant to let go. The planet itself spun slow and regal, its surface covered in luminous forests and structures that shimmered like glass under moonlight. From orbit, Valari looked like a pearl dipped in sapphire ink, beautiful, mysterious, and, at its heart, grieving. In the spired capital of Selenthria, nestled within the high ridges of the Skeleran Mountains, the palace of Queen Enzilvara loomed like a frozen song, ornate, ancient, and echoing with the absence of laughter. Her Highness had not laughed in 3 years, 8 months, and 17 Earth Standard days. The last time she had, it was because her daughter Illyra had placed a kinetic displacer under the footrest of a visiting dignitary from RG Prime, launching him 7 meters into a decorative pool of ceremonial mollusks. The Queen had tried to scold the child, tried and failed, but her amusement had betrayed her, and she'd ended up apologizing to the sputtering ambassador while shaking with laughter. Now her throne room was cold. Queen Enzilvara sat tall in her obsidian seat, its curved supports forming the silhouette of wings, an ancient symbol of Illyrian royalty. Her hair, black as the void between stars, fell in tight braids along the length of her back, threaded with thin strands of vibrosteel that sang softly when she moved. Her skin was the pale silver white of moonlight over frost, and her ears, long and slender, twitched faintly at each sound, an involuntary habit from her warrior training in younger days. But her eyes, once fierce and defiant, now rested quietly, hollowed by loss. She'd stopped screaming into the sky after the second year. Grief, she discovered, eventually ran out of volume. It didn't go away. It just got quieter, like an old wound in deep winter. "My queen," a voice said gently, intruding like a breeze that forgot to knock. Vec, her personal assistant orb, hovered beside the throne. The orb was 3 hands wide, metallic, and covered in tiny thruster ports and sensor nodes. It had been gifted to her by the Terran diplomatic mission 20 years ago, though she suspected it was actually a repurposed Earthside toaster with delusions of grandeur. "Speak," Enzil murmured, without lifting her gaze from the hollow projection hovering before her. A still image of her daughter, caught mid-laugh, frozen in time. Her fingers grazed the edge of the light. Vec beeped solemnly. "Another delegation requests an audience. Trade issues. They bring proposals, graphs, and a disturbing number of pies." Pies? Apparently it is a gesture of friendship or intimidation. Earth customs are difficult to parse. She sighed. "Tell them to wait." "They've already been waiting for 6 hours." "Good. Let them perfect the art." Vec wobbled in what might have been a gesture of mild disapproval. "Might I also remind Her Highness that today marks the anniversary of the—" "I am aware," Enzil said, her voice iron-wrapped in velvet. "Yes, of course. I'll just hover over here and practice not speaking." He drifted sideways a respectful half-meter and dimmed his glow. Beyond the palace windows, storm clouds gathered above the sapphire canopy of the forest. The weather system responded to Enzil's emotional state, a quirk of Valari's ancient terraforming network. She had once tried to meditate it into compliance. The result had been a month of flash hail and sentient tornadoes. Grief, it turned out, was not something programmable. She rose from the throne, her gown of layered ultrafiber sweeping behind her like a shadow stitched with starlight. With slow steps, she passed beneath the tall arches of the throne hall, through the corridor of ancestors, statues of former queens, each with expressions carved to suggest courage, wisdom, and the very faintest trace of condescension. She paused before the last in the line, her own mother, Queen Elene. Cold marble eyes stared back at her. "You were never good with emotions," Enzil whispered, "and here I am, grieving by committee." The statue did not reply, though a loose pebble did fall from its base, landing with a dramatic clink. "Thank you," Enzil muttered. "I appreciate your commentary." She walked to the observatory spire, the tallest point of the palace. From there she could see the distant flicker of ships in orbit, lines of silver threading the skies. Beyond, stars burned indifferent. She did not cry. Royalty did not cry. Somewhere on Earth, a planet so far removed from the galactic stage, it wasn't even invited to the annual diplomatic potluck. Theo Blaine was making a very poor breakfast. His toaster had exploded again. I swear, Marvin, if this is because of that stupid Wi-Fi drone mesh thing you set up, I will fill your beard with jam while you sleep. Through the open door of the tiny, badly leveled trailer, Marvin, a wiry man with the tangled hair of a mad prophet and the permanent scent of olives, squinted from behind a VR headset. Unlikely. It's probably the child again. You know, the one who screams in sonic harmonics and made the cat levitate. Theo turned toward the child who sat cross-legged on the counter, carefully dissecting a pocket calculator. She had the unmistakable poise of someone used to command, a small, elegant face framed by ink-dark hair, and, unmistakably, long, tapering ears. Can we maybe not disassemble everything I own? Theo asked. The child blinked at him, then chirped a tone that made the fridge hiccup. Marvin ducked. She just crashed my drone fleet again. She's 7. She's alien. Big difference. 7's just a suggestion. Theo stared at the girl, who stared back solemnly, then reached out and gently turned off the coffee maker with what was definitely her mind. Okay, he muttered, scratching his head. Definitely not human, which means I need to return her. Somehow, somewhere. She might be royalty, Marvin offered. How can you tell? She has that you may speak face. Theo nodded. She did throw my sandwich at me because it wasn't symmetrical. See? He looked back at the child. All right, Your Majesty, let's find out where you belong, because I'm good at exactly 3 things. Crash landing ships, getting lost, and, maybe, returning runaway princesses. He had no idea, of course, that across the stars, the mother of this child was gazing into the same sky, whispering her daughter's name like it might fold space and bring her home. Illyra. A name like music, a name lost to time. But time, as both would soon learn, had a very strange sense of humor. Theo Blaine had never been good at making plans. His life strategy was more of a loosely assembled playlist of bad decisions, desperate improvisations, and the occasional well-timed burrito. So when he found himself hiding behind a suspiciously creaky dumpster in downtown Reno with an alien child in tow, he couldn't even pretend to be surprised. Starlet, as he had decided to call her after much debate, Calculator and Miss Pointy Ears had been vetoed by Marvin, sat perched beside him, humming to herself. Not in any normal human way. No. Starlet's hum vibrated the very molecules in the air, causing the dumpster lid to rattle and nearby rats to suffer brief but profound existential crises. Theo peeked over the edge. 2 men in black suits loitered by his battered truck, poking suspiciously at the rusted exterior as if expecting it to be a portal to another dimension. To be fair, the last time Theo had tinkered with the engine, it had briefly started speaking Portuguese. All right, kid, Theo whispered. We need to be subtle, invisible, like shadows. Starlet tilted her head, absorbing this wisdom. Then she promptly stood up and began waving her arms like a deranged semaphore operator. Starlet, Theo hissed. What part of subtle involves interpretive dance? Starlet made a series of musical clicks that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Then she stomped her bare foot on the cracked pavement, and to Theo's horror and amazement, the entire block's streetlights exploded in synchronized pops. The men in suits immediately drew what looked like high-voltage tasers. Okay, Theo said, heart pounding. New plan, running. They bolted. Starlet, giggling now, moved with an eerie, graceful speed, weaving between trash cans and startled pigeons with the natural ease of a creature born under alien skies. Theo, considerably less graceful, managed to trip over a suspiciously placed hot dog cart, overturning it and leaving a trail of wieners in their wake. Behind them, the men shouted something about unauthorized non-terrestrial acquisition and warrant for retrieval, which Theo translated to mean they were in deep, deep cosmic trouble. They ducked into a side alley, Theo panting heavily. Starlet, not even winded, tugged at the frayed hem of his jacket and pointed upward. Theo followed her gesture and spotted a fire escape ladder hanging just out of reach. Right, he muttered, because climbing always goes so well for me. He jumped, missed, jumped again, missed harder. Starlet rolled her eyes in an expression that transcended species, and with a casual flick of her fingers, bent the ladder down toward them. Theo grabbed it with a strangled yelp clambering up awkwardly as Starlet floated up beside him without even touching the rungs. "I hate physics," he grumbled. Starlet chirped something that, based on context and the smugness of her smile, Theo assumed meant, "You're just bad at it." They reached the rooftop and sprinted across, past clanking air conditioning units and discarded satellite dishes. The neon skyline of Reno stretched before them in all its cheap, glittering glory, like a cosmic joke at the expense of architecture. Theo knew they couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, someone, government suits, bounty hunters, or, knowing his luck, sentient vending machines, was going to catch up. They needed answers, and there was only one person he trusted for answers. Unfortunately, that person was Marvin. "You want me," Marvin said, peering over a cup of suspiciously green tea, "to hack into what amounts to the intergalactic equivalent of a DMV?" Theo stood awkwardly in Marvin's living room, trying not to trip over the army of drone parts scattered across the carpet. Starlet was carefully dismantling one of Marvin's prized surveillance drones, rearranging its pieces into a surprisingly accurate model of the Orion Spur. "Not the whole DMV," Theo said. "Just, I don't know, the Galactic Missing Persons Registry?" Marvin laughed, a sound like a goat choking on a harmonica. "Buddy, you're lucky if they don't file you under lost and found." "Marvin, come on, look at her!" Theo gestured to Starlet, who had somehow upgraded the model drone to project a small hologram of a rotating galaxy. "She's not from here. She needs to go home." Marvin scratched his beard, considering. "I mean, she is smarter than you." "That's not a high bar." "Fair." After a long sip of his tea, which Theo suspected contained more caffeine than legal, Marvin sighed dramatically. "Fine, I'll try. But if the Galactic Patrol shows up and vaporizes my Wi-Fi router, I'm blaming you." He shuffled off to his control console, a Frankenstein's monster of antique computers, jury-rigged alien tech, and something that looked suspiciously like a repurposed espresso machine. As Marvin typed, Theo sank into a lumpy armchair, Starlet curling up beside him like a cat. He looked down at her and sighed. "You're not making this easy, you know." Starlet blinked at him, then reached up and gently tugged on his nose. Theo swatted her hand away, laughing despite himself. Yeah, keep your alien dignity." Minutes stretched. Marvin muttered darkly under his breath about encryption levels that make Fort Knox look like a lemonade stand. At one point, one of his drones buzzed overhead, and Starlet casually reached up and plucked it from the air like a firefly. Finally, with a triumphant cackle, Marvin spun in his chair. "Got something!" Theo jumped up. "What? What is it?" Marvin tapped the screen. A holographic image blossomed into view, a sleek starship design unfamiliar to Earth engineers, emblazoned with a crest, an intricate spiral of silver stars wrapped around a rising wing. "The House of Silvera," Marvin read aloud. "Royal bloodline of Valari. Status, crisis. Missing heir, Illyra Ensel. Last known coordinates, classified." Theo stared at the image, then at Starlet. She stared back solemnly, her long ears twitching slightly. "She's a princess?" he whispered. Starlet made a noise like 1,000 tiny bells and beamed. Marvin leaned back, hands behind his head. "Congratulations, Theo. You didn't just kidnap an alien. You kidnapped an alien royal." Theo groaned and buried his face in his hands. "This is why I don't make plans," he muttered. Above them, the stars shivered with unseen movement. Forces greater than Theo could imagine were starting to stir, and the universe, vast, indifferent, and occasionally hilarious, was only just beginning to take notice. The first time Theo Blaine tried to commandeer a spaceship, he learned two valuable lessons. First, starships are not like bicycles. You can't just wing it and hope muscle memory will kick in. And second, parking violations in orbit come with fines so large they require their own small moons for storage. He remembered both facts vividly as he stared up at the rusty hull of the Silverfish, an ancient cargo hauler he'd borrowed 3 years ago and had somehow failed to return. Starlet bounced excitedly at his side, tugging his sleeve with the impatient energy of someone about to open the universe's best birthday present. She had a tiny backpack now, scavenged from Marvin's endless junk piles, and it bulged suspiciously with things like a screwdriver, a half-eaten protein bar, and what looked very much like a quantum entanglement coil. All right, Theo grumbled, patting her hand. We'll get you home. Just lower your expectations. Significantly. Marvin leaned against the cracked bulkhead, arms crossed, a smirk lurking behind his overgrown beard. You sure you want to fly that death trap? She makes asteroids look aerodynamic. Theo shrugged. Better than hitchhiking across 3 galaxies with a 7-year-old who can bench press gravity. Fair point, Marvin said. Still, you might want this. He tossed a greasy data pad toward Theo, who fumbled it midair before managing a heroic save. What's this? Coordinates, Marvin said. I scraped them from the last Valeran distress signal. Not exactly a postcard, but it might be enough to find her people. Theo blinked. You scraped them? From where? Marvin waggled his eyebrows. Let's just say the United Solar Federation has very bad password hygiene. Theo shook his head and turned toward the ship. If anyone asks, I blame the kid. Starlet made a face at him, an expression that combined royal disdain with mischievous glee, and scampered up the loading ramp as if she owned the ship. Technically, given her knack for rewiring machinery with her mind, she probably did now. The silverfish rumbled as it powered up, coughing dust and static like an old dog being asked to chase one more squirrel. Okay, Starlet, first rule of space travel, Theo said as he stumbled into the cockpit, is always pretend you know what you're doing. Starlet plopped into the co-pilot's chair and immediately poked at buttons with the reckless glee of someone defusing a bomb using only enthusiasm. Theo strapped himself in and muttered a quick prayer to every god, demigod, and warranty department in the known galaxy. The ship groaned, tilted dangerously, then, with a shudder that knocked 3 ceiling panels loose, heaved itself into the sky. Marvin waved cheerfully from the ground, looking like he had just mailed them a package labeled Perishable, Hope, and Bad Luck. They broke atmosphere in a blaze of roaring engines and electronic wheezing, the stars spilling open before them like an ancient, secret road. Theo exhaled, slumping back in the pilot's chair. See? Not so bad. The navigation console immediately burst into flames. Never mind, he added, slapping at the fire with a rag. Starlet giggled and pointed to the secondary console. A thin trail of holographic symbols hovered in the air, coordinates glowing faintly blue. You already plotted a course? Theo asked, incredulous. Starlet nodded solemnly, as if this were the most obvious thing in the universe. Theo stared at the flashing numbers. Good. Great. You're the captain now. I'll just be emergency snack provider. He punched the engines, and the silverfish leapt forward, slicing through the velvet dark, stars smearing into long, beautiful streaks. Queen Ensilvara sat alone in her private meditation chamber, her mind adrift in a storm of memories. Around her, the walls pulsed softly with bioluminescent light, breathing in time with her slow, deliberate breaths. It was not easy to maintain hope in the vacuum left by loss. Every day she struggled against the gravitational pull of despair, the weight of 1,000 diplomatic responsibilities tethered to a heart that had long ago lost its anchor. Yet today, something gnawed at the edges of her awareness. An unfamiliar vibration, like a song heard through heavy walls. A hum of possibility. A knock at the chamber door jolted her from reverie. My queen, came Vec's voice, his tone uncharacteristically nervous. There is an anomaly. Enzel rose with the slow grace of a glacier preparing to crush a mountain and opened the door. An anomaly? An unidentified vessel, Vec said, entering our star system, broadcasting no formal codes, no clearance beacons, but transmitting an open signal. What kind of signal? Vec hesitated. It's an audio message, in Terran dialect. Enzel blinked. Earth? Yes, Your Highness. She frowned. Earth was not known for its interstellar etiquette. Their last diplomatic envoy had tried to bribe her with what he called extra premium cheese snacks and a signed poster of a 20th century action movie star. And the message? She prompted. Vec coughed delicately. It says, and I quote, hi, this is Theo Blaine. I think I found your kid. Please don't vaporize me. The Queen stared. Vec bobbed awkwardly in the air. There's also a second message, a musical one. He played it. From the speakers floated the unmistakable strains of the Earth song, Baby Shark. Ensel closed her eyes, counted to 10, then 15. Somewhere around 20, she realized her first instinct, to unleash the planetary defense grid, was being tempered by something far more dangerous. Hope. Prepare a landing corridor, she said. Vec wobbled in visible relief. Yes, my queen. And, she added grimly, prepare an interpreter. I will not allow Terran pop culture to become the universal language. The silverfish shuddered as it pierced Valare's upper atmosphere, buffeted by wind currents that sparkled faintly with particulate crystals. Below them spread a world of towering spires, vast glowing forests, and lakes that glittered like mercury. Theo stared in awe. Well, that's definitely not Kansas. Starlet wriggled excitedly, practically vibrating out of her seat. She pressed her face against the viewport, her breath fogging the glass. Yeah, I see it too, Theo said, smiling despite the tight knot of nerves forming in his gut. Let's just hope they like visitors. The control console chimed, and an autopilot sequence engaged. The silverfish was being remotely guided toward a massive landing platform that hovered above the forest canopy, supported by columns of humming energy. A royal welcoming committee awaited them. Rows of armored guards with sleek, iridescent armor and long energy staves, and, standing at their head, a tall, luminous figure with black hair, silver-white skin, and long, elegant ears. Starlet gasped. Theo swallowed hard. I think that's your mom. Starlet didn't wait for permission. The moment the ramp hissed open, she bolted. Theo stumbled after her, heart hammering, half expecting to be tackled, vaporized, or at least fined. But none of that happened. Instead, he watched as Starlet sprinted across the landing pad, flung herself into the arms of Queen Ensilvara, and was swept up into an embrace so fierce and desperate that it stole the breath from the very air. The queen knelt, clutching her daughter, murmuring words Theo couldn't hear but understood anyway. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly feeling very small, very human, and very, very out of place. The guards shifted, parting to allow the queen to approach him, her daughter still perched on her hip like a small, imperious koala. Theo braced himself for either a medal or a disintegration. Instead, Queen Ensilvara smiled, a smile so radiant, so utterly devastating, it made the stars themselves seem like dim pretenders. You have done what few could, Terran, she said. Theo tried to think of something appropriately noble to say. What came out was, you're welcome? Starlet giggled, and for the first time in years, so did her mother. The royal halls of Valari were, Theo decided, approximately one chandelier away from achieving full Disney movie levels of intimidating. He walked stiffly beside Queen Ensilvara, trying not to trip on the absurdly smooth floor tiles that looked like someone had melted down stars just to decorate a hallway. His boots squeaked embarrassingly with every step, which, judging by the barely concealed smiles of the palace guards, was apparently the highlight of their day. Starlet trotted ahead, chattering in a rapid, melodic series of Valerian clicks and trills. Her tiny hand occasionally darted out to tug at passing nobles, showing off her human souvenir with the gleeful pride of a child presenting an especially hideous macaroni art project. She's explaining that you are a heroic scavenger from a primitive world, the queen said, her voice as smooth as silk and twice as sharp. Theo coughed. Primitive, huh? With remarkable skill in attracting trouble, she is surprisingly accurate. Well, I aim to be consistent. They entered a massive audience chamber, its vaulted ceiling lined with crystalline panels that shimmered with internal starlight. Hovering sculptures drifted lazily in the air, depicting scenes from Valeri's long, glittering history. Explorers riding beasts that looked like crossbreeds between dolphins and dragons. Architects weaving cities from living stone. Philosophers debating concepts Theo couldn't even begin to comprehend. Probably stuff like, how many black holes can you fit into a teacup? Waiting at the far end was a cluster of advisors, most of whom looked like they'd just bitten into extremely sour fruit. Theo caught murmured fragments of conversation. Security risk, biological contamination, cultural destabilization, and his personal favorite, uncouth bipedal mammal. Queen Enzilvera raised a single imperious hand, and silence fell so hard it practically left a dent in the atmosphere. This human, she said, each word slicing through the air like a well-aimed dagger, brought back what we had given up for lost. He deserves more than suspicion. Theo tried to look humble and heroic, which unfortunately made him look like he needed to sneeze. One of the advisors, a tall Valerian with robes that probably cost more than Theo's entire earthly existence, stepped forward. His expression suggested he had spent his entire life preparing to be outraged and was finally getting his big moment. "With respect, Your Highness," he said, oozing politeness the way certain fish ooze slime, "a human, especially this human, poses unpredictable risk factors. Exposure to our sacred technologies, not to mention his unsanctioned interaction with the royal heir, could destabilize." Starlet interrupted by launching herself at the advisor's head and neatly stealing his ceremonial headdress, which she plopped triumphantly onto Theo's startled skull. The entire hall froze. Theo blinked, heavy crown-like structure wobbling precariously atop his hair. The queen smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "It seems the heir herself has spoken." The advisor flushed a deep, mortified silver and backed away hastily, muttering apologies about cultural spontaneity. Theo adjusted the oversized headdress and muttered to Starlet, "Thanks, kid. Nothing says diplomatic immunity like millinery assault." Starlet giggled and beamed at him like he just passed some impossibly important test. Later, after Theo was politely but firmly decrowned, he found himself seated in an enormous dining hall, facing what could only be described as a culinary crime scene. Apparently, Valerian feasts were a combination of art installation, scientific experiment, and minor hazard. His plate featured a quivering purple cube that emitted faint jazz music when prodded, a translucent noodle-like entity that tried to wriggle away if you didn't eat it fast enough, and something that looked suspiciously like a marshmallow but smelled exactly like burnt tire rubber. Theo poked a particularly lively blob with his fork. It growled. He decided to take his chances with the musical cube, biting down carefully. To his immense surprise, it tasted like the best blueberry pie he had ever had in his life. If that pie had been laced with a mild hallucinogenic that made the ceiling tiles start offering him tax advice. Starlet, meanwhile, devoured her meal with alarming gusto, clearly overjoyed to be home. Every few bites, she would shove a morsel at Theo, chattering instructions in rapid Valerian, most of which he interpreted as, "Eat this, it's funny." Queen Enzilvara watched the proceedings with a kind of exhausted fondness. "She has missed laughter," she said quietly. Theo smiled, feeling an odd warmth in his chest. "Well, she's got enough to spare now. She'll probably infect the whole planet." The queen tilted her head, studying him. "You are an unusual Terran." "I get that a lot. Usually after I've broken something expensive." The queen's smile deepened, but it was tinged with something wistful. "Tell me, Theo Blaine, how did you find her?" Theo set down his fork and leaned back, the memories flooding back like a movie played at half speed. The night he found Starlet alone in the junkyard, half buried under scrap metal. The way she had fixed his truck's engine with a single touch. The endless questions she had asked in musical coos and wild hand gestures about everything from toasters to thunderstorms. "She found me, really," he said finally. "I just didn't let go." The queen nodded slowly, as if this answered a question she hadn't even dared to ask aloud. "You are aware," she said, voice soft, "that by our laws you are now bound to our house." Theo blinked. "Wait, what?" "It is ancient tradition," the queen continued, unfazed by his growing panic. "He who restores the lost heir becomes family." Theo's brain promptly packed a tiny suitcase and tried to leave through his ear. "Family?" he echoed weakly. "Like honorary uncle, distant cousin, guy who sometimes shows up at holidays, but everyone sort of forgets about." The queen's laughter was low and musical. "Closer than that." Theo opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then settled on banging his forehead lightly against the table. Starlet leaned over and patted his hair. The queen stood, regal and luminous. "Tomorrow we will hold a ceremony, and you, Theo Blaine of Earth, will be formally welcomed into the house of Ensilvara. Theo looked up at the dazzling alien queen, at the grinning alien child, at the alien food that was beginning to hum ominously on his plate. "Well," he said, voice dry as Martian dust, "at least my mom always said I'd marry into money." Starlet threw a noodle at him in what he assumed was Valerian approval. Above the shimmering palace, the night sky bent and glittered with the weight of destiny, and Theo Blaine, accidental hero, reluctant royal, and future first subject of several truly confusing diplomatic memos, wondered not for the first time what exactly he had gotten himself into. If Theo had thought there was a limit to how bizarre his life could get, Valerai was determined to prove him wrong. The next morning, he was yanked out of bed by what could only be described as a polite abduction squad. 5 attendants, each looking like they'd been grown in a lab dedicated solely to crafting tall, disdainful creatures, ushered him through a series of luxurious baths, scrubbed him with something that smelled suspiciously like optimism mixed with eucalyptus, and stuffed him into ceremonial garb so complicated it might have required its own instruction manual. The final result was a flowing silver robe, embroidered with shifting patterns that responded to his mood. It was all very regal, very impressive, and very unfortunate, because Theo's mood at that moment was 90% sheer terror and 10% wanting to hide under the nearest table. One of the attendants, a Valarian male with cheekbones sharp enough to perform minor surgery, handed him a mirror. Theo blinked. In the reflection, he looked, well, kind of like a wizard who had lost his staff but picked up a particularly judgmental cat. His robe was flashing a nervous, flickering storm pattern across the chest, much to the attendant's visible horror. "Is this normal?" Theo asked, gesturing at the living embroidery. The attendant gave him a look usually reserved for stubborn toddlers and out-of-tune bagpipes. "Perhaps you should regulate your emotional projection." Theo nodded solemnly and immediately tried thinking about cold, calm things, glaciers, deep space, a tax audit. The robe responded by displaying a field of slowly falling snowflakes. Victory. He was marched down a series of gleaming corridors, Starlet skipping beside him in a miniature version of his robe, except hers had tiny dancing constellations twinkling across it. She was ecstatic about the whole thing, occasionally reaching up to tug at Theo's sleeve and babble gleefully in Valerian. "I really hope she's not telling everyone I'm secretly a raccoon," Theo muttered under his breath. At the end of the corridor, double doors taller than any he'd ever seen swung open, revealing the grand celestial amphitheater, an architectural miracle so large it probably had its own weather patterns. Villarans filled the stands in thousands, their shimmering garments creating a living galaxy of color. Suspended above them, semi-transparent platforms floated dignitaries, scientists, and off-world guests, all watching with eager eyes. Theo felt about as inconspicuous as a flamingo in a library. At the center of it all stood Queen Ensilvara, radiant in a gown woven with threads of actual starlight, her long ears adorned with delicate silver chains that chimed softly with every breath of wind. She raised her hands and the massive hall fell into complete, reverent silence. Theo shuffled forward, robe whispering around him, his brain issuing increasingly desperate suggestions like, "Run!" and feign a sudden allergic reaction to ceremonial responsibility. The queen spoke, her voice amplified and layered with subtle harmonic tones that made it resonate in the bones of every listener. "Today, the house of Ensilvara restores what was lost and welcomes what was unexpected." Starlet danced forward, giggling, and presented Theo with a small crystalline object shaped like an impossibly delicate flower. It shimmered with an inner light, pulsing in time with his heartbeat the moment he touched it. The queen continued, "By ancient right, by the stars who bore us, by the songs written in the fabric of existence, we claim Theo Blaine of Earth as kin." The crowd erupted in a sound somewhere between a cheer and the roar of a spaceship launching. Theo, ever the eloquent diplomat, managed to respond with, cool." He was promptly awarded a formal sash, a title which sounded suspiciously unpronounceable, but roughly translated to "he who returned the starborn child," and also probably needs supervision. and a ceremonial kiss on the forehead from Queen Ensilvara herself, who smelled like alien flowers and inevitability. Afterward, a massive celebration unfolded across the palace grounds. Theo found himself paraded through gardens filled with singing plants, markets offering glowing fruits and self-heating pastries, and arenas where anti-gravity dancers pirouetted through floating rings of fire. He was introduced to countless nobles, each with names longer than most Tolstoy novels. They all wanted to touch his earth hands, which they found amusingly textured, or inspect his primitive clothing, which one scholar declared quaintly post-industrial. At one point, Theo found himself cornered by a duo of Valaran inventors who wanted to install a mood recalibration chip in his brain to enhance diplomatic pliability. He excused himself by faking a coughing fit so violent Starlet had to dramatically lead him away, like a tiny, bossy nurse. Later, sprawled on a bench overlooking the floating gardens, Theo stared up at Valari's twin moons chasing each other across the sky. Not exactly what I had on my to-do list this year, he mused aloud. Starlet clambered onto the bench beside him, wriggling like an excited kitten, and pulled a small device from her pocket. It was a hollow projector, and with a few delighted taps, she summoned a swirling, sparkling image of Earth, blue and green and stubbornly ordinary. Theo watched it spin, a lump forming in his throat. Home had never looked so beautiful, or so far away. Gotta admit, he said, nudging Starlet gently, you Valarians really know how to throw a party. She beamed up at him, eyes reflecting the twin moons. Theo leaned back and sighed, the silver robe still faintly snowing around him. Somewhere behind them, music swelled, strange, wild, impossible music. And above it all, Queen Ensilvara's laughter rang out, free and unburdened for the first time in too many long years. In the end, Theo thought, maybe the universe didn't run on logic or law or probability. Maybe it ran on the stubborn hope of a lost child and the foolish courage of someone stupid enough to follow it home. The next morning, Theo awoke to the distinct feeling that something was wrong, or at least significantly more chaotic than usual. For one thing, there was a light blue creature perched on his chest, humming an off-key tune through what appeared to be 3 separate mouths. For another, his robe had changed overnight to display a cartoonish animation of himself being chased by angry, flailing vegetables. Theo groaned and batted half-heartedly at the creature, which retaliated by sneezing a small cloud of glitter directly into his face. "Morning, Theo," croaked a voice from somewhere near the foot of his enormous bed. Squinting through the sparkles, Theo saw a tiny Valerian scribe scribbling notes furiously onto a floating hologram. "We are compiling data for the official house archives," the scribe explained in a matter-of-fact tone, adjusting the monocle wedged precariously over one elongated eye, "including your biometrics, cultural references, and unusual attributes." "Attributes?" Theo croaked, trying to sit up without disturbing the glittery pest still humming on his chest. "For instance," the scribe continued without missing a beat, "you possess a remarkable resistance to dream spore allergens, an astonishingly high capacity for carbohydrate intake, and an alarming tendency toward spontaneous sarcasm." Theo blinked. "Is sarcasm considered a biological trait here?" "Indeed, it is not common among Valarians. Our scientists are most intrigued." As if summoned by that declaration, a trio of white-coated Valerian researchers burst into the room, tripping over themselves in their eagerness. They began circling Theo like buzzards, murmuring excitedly, "Remarkable limb coordination despite primitive joint structure. Minimal dermal bioluminescence. Fascinating. Suggest cranial mapping immediately." Theo pulled the blanket over his head. Starlet chose that moment to bound into the room, babbling cheerfully and tossing a piece of fruit, bright pink and glowing faintly, onto his bed. He peeked out from under the blanket, eyeing the fruit suspiciously. "Is that breakfast, or a highly localized explosive?" Starlet giggled and mimed eating it. Encouraged, Theo bit into the fruit and immediately regretted everything. It tasted like what might happen if a mango and a car battery had a love child during a lightning storm. Still sparking slightly around the edges, he flopped back against the pillows. "All right," he wheezed. "Can someone please tell me if I'm under attack, understudy, or underfed?" Queen Ensilvara entered then, regal and composed despite the early hour, and the fact that Theo's room now resembled a particularly eccentric science fair. "You are under preparation," she said smoothly, waving the researchers away with a glance, "for your first royal mission." Theo groaned again. Of course, because things were going way too smoothly. The Queen's lips quirked in a smile. "You are to accompany Starlet and an envoy team to the Forge planetoid, where a diplomatic retrieval must be made." "Retrieval?" he echoed warily. "A missing artifact of great significance. Your peculiar talents make you uniquely suited to assist. Let me guess. Sarcasm is the secret key to the vault?" "You will see." Before he could argue, Starlet grabbed his hand and dragged him bodily out of bed, chattering excitedly. The Forge planetoid was a floating industrial marvel, a gleaming sphere of interconnected factories and foundries, orbiting a dying ember of a sun. Theo watched in awe as their sleek royal shuttle descended toward the planetoid's bustling ports, its docking arms unfolding like metallic spider legs. Inside the shuttle, Starlet fidgeted with barely contained excitement, practicing her serious diplomat face in the reflective surfaces of the windows. The result made her look like she was plotting to steal everyone's lunch money. Their arrival caused quite the stir. Dock workers, engineers, and traders gawked openly at the strange entourage, a tiny Valerian princess, an overdressed human, and a retinue of grim-faced royal guards. Theo couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not just with curiosity, but with calculation. He stuck close to Starlet, who was unfazed, occasionally waving at suspicious characters like they were old friends. They were met by the Forge steward, an ancient-looking being who resembled a cross between a beetle and a sculpture made entirely of scrap metal. His name was Croth, and he bowed low enough that one of his mechanical arms accidentally clipped a passing drone. "Apologies, your majesties," Croth rasped, recovering with surprising grace for someone made of 80% spare parts. "We have secured the artifact in Vault Primaris, but there have been complications." "Complications?" Queen Enzilvara asked coolly, voice flowing through the communicator bead tucked in Theo's ear. Croft's multiple eyes blinked out of sync. "Local interest groups have laid claim to the object. We expect protests, possibly mild sieges." Theo rubbed his temples. Nothing says peaceful artifact retrieval like a good old-fashioned siege. Croft's mechanical claws clicked nervously. "Your assistance in negotiating would be invaluable." Theo sighed. "Let me guess. You want me to talk to them? Or distract them while we retrieve the item?" Croft said hopefully. Theo shot a look at Starlet, who gave him an encouraging thumbs up, completely missing the concept of plausible deniability. Negotiations turned out to be a loose term for stand in front of a mob of extremely angry scavengers while making jokes until they forget what they were mad about. Theo planted himself on a makeshift podium cobbled together from shipping crates, faced a sea of irate faces, and took a deep breath. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed individuals of indeterminate taxonomy," he began, spreading his arms wide. "I understand you're upset. I get it. Valuable artifact, a lot of sentimental value, probably looks great in a living room." Somewhere in the crowd, a scavenger laughed. Just one, but it was enough to crack the tension. "I propose a compromise," Theo continued. "We take the artifact. You get this." He produced a tiny battered earth keychain from his pocket, a miniature rubber duck in a space helmet. The silence was profound. Theo jiggled the duck. It squeaked. The entire front row of scavengers burst out laughing. By the time the guards wheeled out actual compensation, food rations, energy cells, and a promise of future trade agreements, the crowd had dissolved into cheerful chaos, passing the rubber duck around like a sacred relic. Vault Primaris cracked open under Croft's supervision, revealing the artifact, a crystalline orb swirling with strange symbols, humming faintly in the air. Starlet clapped her hands in delight, while Theo just marveled at how absurdly shiny important things tended to be in this part of the galaxy. As they departed, Starlet handed Theo the rubber duck, solemn as a priestess bestowing a holy relic. "For bravery," she said in halting Terran, grinning like the troublemaker she was. Theo tucked the duck into his robe pocket, feeling the absurd weight of it. Somehow, in a universe full of strange wonders and impossible problems, He had found his niche, surviving by sheer weirdness. And honestly, he was starting to like it. Theo had begun to suspect that Valerians had a very different idea of quiet reflection. Back on Earth, it meant a cup of coffee, maybe a park bench, and the gentle hum of distant traffic. Here, it apparently involved a gravity-suspended chamber, flickering with fractal light patterns and haunted by an artificial intelligence that liked to sing operatic arias in languages it admitted were entirely made up. "Why does this thing sound like a dishwasher possessed by an Italian ghost?" Theo asked, floating awkwardly in his lotus-shaped seat. The Queen's voice came softly through the comm bead. "The chamber of consideration is tuned to stimulate transcendental cognition through interpretive sensory overload." Right. So, not a spa day. Queen Enzilvara had invited him here to center his mind before their next journey. What she had failed to mention was that the chamber's AI, named Tesseranth, took its job very seriously. It had already tried to hypnotize him with flashing lights, recite Valerian poetry directly into his brain, and once, alarmingly, displayed a montage of Earth history cobbled together entirely from soap operas and outdated sitcoms. "Your species appears to value prolonged emotional misunderstanding, followed by declarations of affection under meteorological duress," Tesseranth noted. Theo groaned. "Yeah, that checks out." Eventually, mercifully, the floating seat docked back at ground level and released him, although he suspected his brain had been lightly scrambled. Starlet was waiting for him outside, bouncing on her toes and looking way too energized for someone whose idea of breakfast included fermented starlight berries. "We go space now," she chirped, grabbing his sleeve. "Yes, great," Theo said, rubbing his temples. "Let's go space now." Their destination this time was a deep space listening station on the edge of the Valerian expansion zone, a lonely construct orbiting a dead moon, staffed by exactly 3 sentient beings and 1 robot who had long since gone mad with boredom. "This is Station Luma 9, the Queen had explained earlier, where we received the first signal that indicated your ship's presence. There may be more to uncover." Naturally, Theo's imagination immediately filled with possibilities. Long-lost alien messages, space pirates, maybe even an interstellar pizza coupon with no expiration date. Reality, as usual, was weirder. The station was shaped like a giant ear, because of course it was, and bristled with sensor spires, antennae, and something that looked suspiciously like a weather vane, but probably tracked subspace tachyon flow. Probably. Theo wasn't about to ask. They were greeted by the station's lead operator, a cylindrical being named Volm, who resembled a glowing soup thermos and spoke entirely in harmonic pulses. Starlet translated energetically, occasionally pausing to make up words when the real ones proved too boring. "Volm says hello," she beamed, "and also asks if you brought cheese." Theo blinked. "Did I? What?" "He saw it on one of your cultural broadcasts. He is fascinated." Theo sighed. "I really need to stop Earth TV from escaping into space." Volm led them to the central archive chamber, where rows of humming consoles and glowing data spirals painted the walls. Theo tried not to touch anything. The last time he'd leaned on a control panel, he'd accidentally initiated a system-wide poetry contest. The computer had won. "We received the distress signal from your vessel 6 cycles ago," Volm buzzed musically. "But before that, we detected something unusual." Starlet tilted her head. "A ghost ping?" Theo raised an eyebrow. "That sounds very science fiction-y." I approve. Volm adjusted a few dials. Well, probably dials. They were sort of floaty crystal pads that responded to music and the intensity of your self-esteem. The screen filled with a swirling image of space, then zoomed in on a faint, flickering pulse coming from the edge of the void. "It is not natural," Volm sang, "nor artificial." Theo leaned in. "That's not comforting." "It pulses in a pattern," Starlet added, eyes wide. "It speaks, maybe." "Has anyone tried answering?" Theo asked. Volm hesitated, buzzing uncertainly. "Oh," Theo said, straightening. "You were waiting for me to do it." They set up a comm interface, something between a harp and a keyboard, and positioned Theo in front of it. Tesseranth, who had decided to tag along in holographic form, because of course it had, hovered nearby, offering unsolicited musical advice. "I suggest a chord progression rooted in longing, but resolved with tentative hope, it said. I suggest you let me wing it, Theo replied. He played a few soft notes. Nothing fancy, just a melody he remembered from Earth, something his mother had hummed while making dinner. It floated out through the deep space transmitter, across millions of kilometers, into the unknown. They waited. Nothing. Theo exhaled. Then, a response. Not in music exactly, but in color and rhythm and a low hum that made the air feel like it was holding its breath. The station lights dimmed. Every console glowed. Starlet clutched his arm. It heard you. Theo stared at the screen. The pulse now mimicked his rhythm. Slightly off key, but close enough. Volm's voice hummed softly. It is trying to speak your language. Theo's mouth went dry. What is it? The Queen's voice came through the comm bead, low and thoughtful. Something ancient, something lost. Perhaps something that remembers. The station began recording everything. The ghost ping transmitted more patterns, growing clearer, more structured. Words, symbols, or just echoes of something that once was. Tesserynth, uncharacteristically quiet, murmured, This is not a message. It is a memory. Theo sat in silence, the weight of it all settling around him like stardust. He wasn't just a visitor in this strange empire anymore. Something was calling to him. Something older than the Queen, older than Valari. Something buried in the darkness between stars. And he had just said hello. Well, he said at last, turning to Starlet with a crooked grin. On the bright side, it didn't ask for cheese. Starlet blinked. Yet, it was a rare thing for the Valarian throne room to feel quiet, not in the absence of Soundway, but in the sense that the universe itself had paused, held its breath, and peeked in through the windows to see how it would all end. The grand dome chamber hummed gently under the golden glow of its hovering crystals, and for once, no one was arguing about diplomatic rituals, no scribe was babbling legal footnotes, and no one was floating upside down due to a mild anti-grav malfunction. It was, in short, a moment of improbable calm. Theo stood at the base of the Queen's dais, his hands tucked into the sleeves of his now slightly less embarrassing robe, an updated version with far fewer animated vegetables. Starlet fidgeted beside him, holding a ceremonial data orb with both hands like it might explode if she sneezed. Queen Enzilvera regarded them from her throne with a rare softness, the kind that made her angular features almost warm. So, Theo said, breaking the silence, we talked to a possibly ancient cosmic intelligence, made friends with a sentient thermos, and I still haven't been vaporized. I'd call that a win. You also helped prevent a potential interstellar incident, the Queen replied smoothly, and brought my daughter home. Theo glanced at Starlet, who beamed, her long ears twitching with excitement. She had changed in the weeks since their journey began. A little more grounded, a little less likely to initiate diplomatic missions, using only a plush toy and enthusiasm. Only slightly less, but progress was progress. The memory signal they'd found on Luma 9 had, after considerable translation and several dramatic musical interludes, revealed itself as a time-displaced data capsule sent by the original builders of the Forge planetoid, long extinct. Their technology, Theo had learned, was the foundation of Valaran advancement. The capsule was meant for one person only, someone carrying both human and Valaran genetic markers, which, as it turned out, meant Starlet. The Queen had not taken the revelation easily. In the days that followed, Enzilvera retreated to her meditation spire, staring for hours into the data streams. Theo thought it best to give her space, until she summoned him with a single, simple message. We need to talk. Bring snacks. He arrived with 2 bags of roasted star peas and an emergency brownie. What does it mean? She had asked then, voice unguarded. That she's from both our worlds, Theo replied gently. That you weren't just given a child, you were chosen to raise a bridge. Enzilvera had stared at him for a long moment, then said, Do you always talk like that? Only when I'm trying to sound wise. The Queen had smiled ever so faintly. It's working. Barely. Now in the throne room, the ceremonial data orb glowed in Starlet's hands, recording the proceedings. Starlet would inherit the throne one day, not just as Valaran royalty, but as a child of 2 civilizations. The council had agreed if only reluctantly. Some still whispered behind the queen's back, but none dared challenge her openly, not after seeing what the human ambassador could do with nothing more than a duck-shaped keychain and a working knowledge of awkward silences. So, Theo said now, shifting on his feet, I guess this is the part where I bow or wave or politely vanish in a puff of exotic particles? You're not leaving, the queen said, descending the dais with an elegance that made Theo straighten instinctively. I'm not. You are now an official ambassador of Valare to Earth and allied worlds, she said, and a royal consultant in the Department of Unpredictable Solutions. Theo blinked. That's not a real department. It is now. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally said, Do I get a hat? Starlet immediately produced a small, glittering circlet from behind her back. It looked suspiciously like a repurposed snack bowl, but he put it on anyway. The ceremonial functions wrapped up in a blur of light, music, and one unfortunate moment where the confetti cannons triggered early and showered everyone in celebratory marshmallows. Starlet tried to catch them on her tongue. Theo tried not to fall off the platform laughing. Later, as the sky above Valare turned its strange twilight hue, a blend of lavender and pale gold, Theo and the queen stood on one of the high balconies overlooking the city. The spires gleamed. Ships rose and fell in smooth arcs. Somewhere below, the citizens celebrated with dances that defied gravity and music that made your teeth itch in a good way. You've changed, Enzilvara said, folding her arms. Theo shrugged. Just better wardrobe and slightly improved manners. No, she said. You walk like someone who belongs. He was quiet a moment. It's funny, he said. Back on Earth, I never fit. Always too curious, too sarcastic, too much. But here, in a world of floating children and talking thermoses, I make sense. She nodded, her long ears catching the breeze. The universe is like that. It waits until you give up, then offers you something impossibly strange and just right. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of laughter, engines, and the occasional explosion from what Theo hoped was a firework and not an early prototype of the new Royal Kitchen Assistant robot. Starlet joined them, clutching a drawing she had made. Her, the queen, and Theo standing under two suns. Everyone had very long legs and stars for eyes. Did I get your nose right? She asked, frowning at Theo. He squinted at the picture. Honestly, it's an improvement. As the stars began to rise, brighter and closer than they ever looked on Earth, Theo felt something inside him shift, not with fanfare or a sudden revelation, but like a door quietly clicking open. He'd come to this world as a lost man in a broken ship. Now he was family, not by blood but by bond, by banana-colored robes and impossible missions, and the stubborn kindness of an alien queen who refused to let grief swallow her. And Starlet, his chaos child companion, had reminded him of something he hadn't known he was missing. Wonder. Well, he said, glancing between them, what's next? The queen gave him a sidelong look. There's always something next. Theo grinned. Good, I was getting bored. Far above in the space between stars, the ancient memory pulse continued to echo, not as a warning, but as an invitation. The universe was vast, strange, and full of secrets. But for once, Theo wasn't lost in it. He was home,